Hi, I just wanted to talk briefly about subject-verb agreement and kind of review what it means when we say first person, second person, or third person point of view, where you should be adding to and revising your profile essays. And obviously, the most important things to think about are creating a clear dominant impression, giving good examples, making sure the paragraphs are organized. All that stuff's really important. But I think that when you get to the end of the essay, that's when you really need to start considering some of your wording choices. Along with really serious errors like fragments and run-ons and comma splices, probably one of the most common problems I see in people's writing has to do with subject-verb agreement. And like the term says, this just means that your subject should match your verb in a couple different ways, which you'll read about later in this activity. But one of the ways that it needs to match is when it comes to the point of view. And again, you probably learned about this a long time ago, but I thought I might review it just in case it wasn't clear. So in writing, there are three main points of view that you can write in: first person, second person, or third person. And the thing is, in third person point of view, there are like different levels of this. We're not going to get into that here. We're just kind of think of the basics. But essentially, first person point of view, and again, you can kind of see the example that I give up here. First person is the most personal point of view. It's where you're using personal language and talking about things from your own perspective. And like it says here, it's in first person point of view if you are experiencing it yourself. So using words like my or I, me, myself, all those types of words would give a sense to the audience that you're writing in first person point of view. So the example here is, my heart leaped into my throat as I turned and saw a frightening shadow. So, you have this personal language, my heart, and then the verb that goes with it, leaped, right? So again, we use this all the time in writing. Sometimes it's not as appropriate for essays in college, but depends on the genre. The second one, this is probably not used nearly as often in writing, and maybe you hardly ever use this, but second person involves using the word you, and using that to kind of direct the focus outward onto the audience. And like it says here in the parentheses, you might ask, why would you do that? Well, it's a way for a writer to really make the audience feel like he or she is part of the story. So as opposed to the previous example where it says, my heart leaped into my throat as I turned and saw a frightening shadow, where it's personal to me, if I use you and say, you turn and see a frightening shadow, you're kind of bringing the audience more into the situation and making them imagine what it might feel like to be in that situation, right? So again, it's using words like you or yourself, and is really focused more on putting the audience into a particular scene, right? So like I said, you won't see that too often in writing, and you probably won't have to use it very often, but just know that it's different than first person. So the third perspective, and again, one that we use a lot along with first person, it might even be the one we use most often in college writing, would be third person point of view. And like it says here, the purpose of it is to show different points of view, different ones from your own. So instead of being inwardly focused, like first person point of view is, third person is looking outward and looking at other people, other things, rather than ourselves. So instead of using that you, though, it's going to use this more, kind of neutral or outwardly focused language. So a couple examples here under number 3. The children turned and saw the frightening shadow. Again, you don't see any sort of personal language in here. It's focused on these children, these other people. Then you have the second sentence here. They were unaware a cat had walked close to the low-hung lantern. That word they is in third person because it's not focused on me, the writer. It's not focused on that you of the audience, but it's focused on somebody else, right? So things are in third person. If you see words like he, she, they, it, them, all that sort of outwardly focused language. And the reason that all of this matters when it comes to subject-verb agreement is, your verb is always going to be determined by your subject. So that verb is going to change depending on what point of view you're speaking in, right? So if we look in number 3 here where it says they were unaware a cat had walked close to the low-hung lantern. That word were matches up with they because they're both plural, right? So they means more than one person, these children, presumably. So were is a plural verb that fits with that. I wouldn't say something like they was unaware a cat had walked close to the low-hung lantern, right? That would be sort of a subject-verb disagreement, right? Because they is plural, but the word was is what you would use for a singular verb, right? So it's they were instead of they was. So again, the reason I bring this up is because it's sometimes very tricky to figure out which verb to use in what situation. So what you're going to go into below here in the learning activity are specifically some of these trickier situations where people make mismatches all the time when it comes to subject-verb agreement. So again, this is just something to be thinking about when you go back and look over your final version of your profile essay. Just kind of double check to see that those subjects and verbs match up. Otherwise, this might lead to an awkward sounding sentence. And, if you read your paper out loud to yourself and something doesn't sound quite right, it could be a subject-verb agreement problem. So just something to keep in mind there as you're kind of working on your papers.